You remember a time before the silence. The sky was blue. That simple fact was the foundation of your world. You would wake up, and light would be there. It painted the walls and warmed the floors. The world simply made sense. You knew which way was up because the sky was there. It was a vast, blue, and predictable ceiling. You remember the sound of a morning. The distant rumble of traffic was a kind of promise. It meant people were going places. The world was in motion. You remember the taste of coffee, real coffee, grown under an open sky and kissed by a real sun. Life was a collection of these small, certain things. They formed a reality you never thought to question. Why would you? The sun had risen for billions of years. It was the most reliable thing in the universe. You had plans for the week. You had worries about bills and deadlines. You had a life, stitched together with tiny, ordinary threads. You took it all for granted. Of course you did. Everyone did. The idea of it ending was absurd. It was the stuff of overwrought disaster movies, the kind you watch with a bowl of popcorn. You felt safe in the boring, beautiful slowness of it all. It was the last normal day, and you never even knew it. It began not with a sound, but with a color, or rather, the absence of it. One moment, the sun was a cheerful disk in the sky. The next, it was gone. A patch of impossible blackness simply appeared. It was not a shadow. It was not a cloud. It was a hole punched through reality itself. You stared, your mind refusing to process what your eyes saw. The blackness spread. It moved with an unnatural, perfect speed. It devoured the blue of the sky. It consumed the white of the clouds. It swallowed the sun without a flicker or a flare. There was no spectacle, just a quiet, terrifying deletion. In under a minute, the day was gone. The world was plunged into a darkness deeper than any night. It was an absolute, suffocating black, the kind of black you feel in your bones. Panic began as a low murmur in the streets. Then it grew into a confused, rising cry. People looked for an explanation, a super eclipse, a military experiment gone wrong. But this felt different. This felt final. You stood there, under a sky that was no longer a sky. You felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of profound, cosmic wrongness. Then came the second stage. Every broadcast ceased at the exact same moment. The chatter on the radio dissolved into static. The faces on television screens vanished. Every screen, from stadium jumbotrons to the phone in your hand, went dark. The global conversation stopped mid-sentence. The power grids failed in a cascading wave. City lights winked out block by block. The hum of civilization died. The constant, reassuring thrum of electricity was gone. You were left with only the sound of the wind and shouting voices. A great, chilling silence fell upon the world. It was a silence filled with a billion unasked questions. You realized how much you relied on that noise. The hum was the sound of safety, the sound of connection. Now, there was nothing. Just the frantic beat of your own heart. People lit fires in the streets. They huddled together, strangers united by a shared, primal fear. They looked up at the blackness. They waited for something, an answer, an attack, an explanation. But nothing came. The stars were gone. The moon was gone. Every single point of light in the universe had been erased. You were alone in a way humanity had never been alone before. Then, a single sound broke the quiet. It came from everywhere at once. It resonated from dead speakers. It vibrated from silent phones. It was a low, pure tone. It was not aggressive. It was calm, steady, and impossibly ancient. It cut through the rising panic and commanded attention. After the tone, a voice spoke. It was not human. It was a chorus of minds, a measured, patient intelligence. It spoke every human language simultaneously. Yet you understood it perfectly in your own native tongue. The words settled into your mind, a calm, cold injection of truth. The message was not a promise. It was not a threat. It was a cage, described in gentle terms. "Do not be alarmed," the voice said. "Your development is being curated. Your world is now a sanctuary. You are contained." That was all. A simple, devastating statement of fact. The voice did not elaborate. It did not answer the screams and the prayers. It delivered its declaration and then fell silent once more. But the message remained. It echoed in the darkness. You were curated. You were a sanctuary. You were prisoners. And your jailer was the sky itself. In the years that followed, you gave it a name. The experts, or what was left of them, called it the shroud. It was a simple, descriptive term for a concept that defied imagination. It was a prison built on a scale that shattered all known star science, a megastructure of impossible size and strength. Initial theories were wild. Was it a cloud of nanomachines? A field of exotic matter? Probes were sent. They never returned. They simply vanished into the blackness without a signal. The shroud did not reflect light. It did not emit radiation. It absorbed everything. It was a perfect wall between you and the universe. The apathetic geniuses of the new underground figured it out. It was a full Dyson sphere, not just a swarm of collectors. It was a solid shell encasing your entire solar system. Its internal surface, facing the sun, was a power plant. Its outer surface, facing you, was a one-way wall. It was engineered with a perfection that was insulting. It did not just block light, it blocked everything. Neutrinos, gravity waves. No signal could get in or out. It was the most absolute quarantine ever constructed. You were not just locked in a room. You were locked out of reality itself. You learned to live by artificial light. The surface of the earth grew cold. A deep, world-killing ice age began within a generation. Life became a subterranean affair. Humanity moved underground, driven by a shared, stubborn will to simply keep going. You became a species of tunnelers and engineers. Great caverns were expanded into cities. You lived your life under tons of rock. Full-spectrum lamps mimicked a sun they could no longer see. The light was sterile. It lacked the random, gentle warmth of the real thing. But it kept the darkness at bay. It was enough to grow food. It was enough to live. A new kind of society was forged in the deep places. A society built on geothermal energy and grim determination. Everything was recycled. Everything was rationed. There was a strange sort of unity in it. The old divisions of nations and wealth mattered less. Everyone was in the same deep, dark boat. You got used to the hum of air recyclers. You learned the layout of tunnels like the back of your hand. You even developed a dark sense of humor about it. Complaining about the artificial weather patterns became a new pastime. It was a strange, cramped, and defiant existence. Occasionally, the voice would return. It never spoke for long. It never engaged in conversation. It simply was. Humanity gave it a name, borrowed from ancient stories. You called them the Wardens. It seemed to fit their self-appointed role. They were the keepers of your terrestrial zoo. In one of its rare broadcasts, it explained its reasoning. The cold logic was perhaps more chilling than any threat. Humanity, it explained, was a statistical anomaly. a species of boundless curiosity and rapid technological growth. You were creative, ambitious, and wildly unpredictable. You were seen as a potential plague upon the stars. The Wardens, a vast and ancient collective, saw themselves as custodians. They pruned galaxies like gardens. They managed star science to prevent cosmic disasters. Your species, on the cusp of true interstellar travel, was a weed. A beautiful, dangerous weed that had to be contained before it spread. They insisted it was not a punishment. It was a preservation. By caging you, they were protecting you from your own worst impulses. They had ended your wars. They had stopped your pollution. They had given you stability. They considered it an act of profound mercy. The Wardens believed their perfect prison was a gift. Their logic was flawless. Their execution, meticulous. They analyzed your species with cold detachment. They understood your biology. They understood your base desires for food, water, and shelter. They provided these things. They believed a creature, once fed and sheltered, would be content. This was their flaw. It was a mistake born of unimaginable age and intelligence. A flaw in their perfect, cold calculations. They had studied your history of violence and greed. They had overlooked everything else. They underestimated your species' irrational desire to see the sun. They did not have a variable for poetry. Their equations had no place for the feeling of grass underfoot. They could not comprehend the sheer, stubborn love for a blue sky. It was a blind spot in their otherwise omniscient gaze. They assumed you would adapt and forget. They assumed the stories of the world before would become myths, faded tales told to children. They did not realize that for you, a myth could be a blueprint. A memory could be a weapon. Their perfect prison had one tiny, human-shaped crack in it. The spark began in the deepest, most forgotten levels of the New World. It started not as a rebellion, but as a whisper. A shared look between two engineers over a flickering console. A line of forbidden poetry scrawled on a dusty wall. A refusal to accept the dark as the final answer. You found them by accident, or perhaps by design. A stray signal led you to a decommissioned geothermal vent. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt coffee. Inside, a small group was gathered around a holographic schematic. They were old and young. They were scientists, soldiers, and artists. They were the children of the underground who had been raised on stories of the sun. They called themselves the Lucian Brotherhood. A bit dramatic, you thought, but the sentiment was right. They believed the story of humanity did not have to end in a cave. It was a long shot, a ridiculous, insane long shot. You were in. The plan was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the most human thing you had ever seen. The early ideas were crude. Drill a hole, launch a missile. But the shroud was not a simple wall. It would repair any breach instantly. Attacking it from the outside was like throwing a pebble at a mountain. But you were not on the outside. You were on the inside. You were standing on a planetary scale engine. The new plan was not to knock on the door. It was to kick it down from the inside out. The plan was to turn the Earth itself into a weapon, a key to unlock your own cage. They called it the Dawn Machine. It involved redirecting the flow of dozens of major geothermal vents, funneling trillions of watts of raw planetary heat into a single, focused point. It would create a lance of pure plasma, a directed eruption of the planet's molten heart. It was an act of incredible risk, a desperate gamble. If they miscalculated, even slightly, they would not just fail. They would crack the planet's crust. They would extinguish all life in a final, fiery spasm. The stakes were not victory or defeat. They were a sunrise or total annihilation. No pressure at all. Building something on that scale was not a quiet process. The energy shifts were subtle at first, tiny seismic tremors that the general population dismissed. But the wardens were not the general population. Their perfect prison was also a perfect sensory net. They felt the change. Their cold, distant attention finally focused upon your world. It was no longer the passive gaze of a zookeeper. It was the focused stare of a guard who hears a strange noise. The shroud, once inert, began to act. Sleek, silver probes descended from the blackness. They drifted silently through the upper caverns. The warden's voice returned. This time, it was different. The calm, patient tone was gone. It was replaced by a cold, sharp curiosity. "Cease this pointless endeavor," it commanded. "Your efforts are predictable. They are futile. Do not damage your sanctuary." The warning only made you work faster. The resistance moved deeper. Operations were shielded in old, lead-lined military bunkers. The probes were a nuisance. They forced you to be clever. You learned their patrol routes. You fed them false data. You played a desperate game of hide-and-seek with gods. The day came without ceremony. There was no grand speech. Just a quiet nod in the command center, deep beneath the Pacific. It was time. You and your team began the ascent. It was a journey of miles, up through the layers of the new world, up through abandoned cities of rock and steel. You reached the surface access port. For the first time in your life, you stepped out onto the skin of the earth. The cold was shocking, even through your insulated suit. The ground was a sheet of gray, wind-swept ice. Before you lay the frozen ruins of a city you only knew from pictures. And above you, nothing. Just the shroud. A perfect, featureless, unending ceiling of black. It seemed to press down on you, to steal the very breath from your lungs. It was the physical manifestation of hopelessness. You looked at it, and for the first time, you felt a flicker of real fear. Your team moved with practiced efficiency. Final connections were made. Power conduits were locked into place. You stood on the dead ground, a tiny figure under an impossible sky. Your heart hammered against your ribs. The final countdown began. A calm voice in your earpiece. 10, 9, 8. You were risking everything for one glimpse of light. The ground began to tremble. It was a low, deep shudder that grew into a planetary roar. You fell to one knee, bracing against the shaking ice. A few miles away, the ground cracked open. A pillar of incandescent light erupted from the earth. It was a pure, white-hot spear of human will. The dawn machine fired. The beam of plasma, brighter than 1,000 suns, shot upward. It struck the blackness of the shroud. For one long, terrible second, nothing happened. The beam was simply swallowed by the dark. A collective gasp of despair went through your comms. It had failed. Then you saw it. A line of fire appeared in the sky. A tiny, glowing crack in the perfect shell. It was the color of a sunrise you had only ever dreamed of. The crack did not heal. It widened. It splintered, spreading like lightning across the firmament. The shroud screamed, a silent tearing of metal and energy. The black sky bled light. A huge section of the prison, hundreds of miles across, tore free. It tumbled away into space, no longer black, but a mirror reflecting a captive sun. A wave of pure, unfiltered sunlight washed over the frozen world. It was the first real light to touch the earth in a century. Through the ragged hole in the sky, you saw them. You saw the stars. They were not the calm, friendly points of light from old pictures. They were a wild, brilliant, terrifying ocean of fire. And they were beautiful. The sheer, raw vastness of it all was overwhelming. You were small, but you were free. Your suit's visor automatically tinted, saving your vision. The light was warm. It was real. Below, in the deep cities, alarms blared as the first sunlight in generations streamed down through sensor shafts. Panic and celebration erupted in equal measure. You had done it. You had broken the cage. Now came the second part of the plan. It was time to send a message. The resistance had prepared a broadcast, not a declaration of war, not a plea for mercy. It was not addressed to the wardens as enemies. It was addressed to them as equals who had made a grave error in judgment. The broadcast was a symphony of recovered data. The sound of birdsong, the laughter of a child, the crashing of ocean waves. Woven into it was a simple, powerful poem, read by 1,000 different voices in 100 different languages. It was a testament to everything the wardens had failed to understand. It spoke of love, of art, of irrational hope. It ended with a simple phrase: "We are not a fire to be contained. We are a dawn that must be shared." You stood under a true sky once more. The wardens were silent. Perhaps they were stunned. Perhaps they were reconsidering. It did not matter. The hole in the sky remained, a permanent, ragged wound in your prison wall, a constant reminder of what you had done, a doorway to the rest of the universe. The long work began, the slow, generational task of returning to the surface, of melting the ice, of planting the first seeds in thawed, barren soil. The world was a blank canvas, scoured clean by time and cold. It was a chance to build something new. Something better, perhaps. You took off your helmet. The air was thin and bitingly cold, but it was real. You tilted your head back and let the light of a distant yellow star fall upon your face. It was the end of the world, you knew. The end of the dark, the end of the silence. It was the first day of forever, and you were ready.